Hello everyone, welcome to our video installment for the cause-effect essay. I have here on the screen for you guys a quote from our lovely Zadie Smith. It's from her novel White Teeth, and I just thought it would be appropriate as we're heading into cause-effect writing. She says, "You must live life with the full knowledge that your actions will remain. We are creatures of consequence." And the reason why I like this is because, of course, you're thinking about consequence or impact tied to a certain story that has really had some sort of influence on you. And so I think it's just appropriate to think about the fact that Zadie Smith is somebody who's highly aware of this, and this is a big part of the reason why I've chosen her for this class. So, things we're working on today. We're going to be exploring structure for the cause-effect essay, and of course you'll notice a little bit of overlap between this and the previous paper, but with, some slight adjustments, and this is just kind of a little bit of a refresher on my expectations. Then our main goal will be to look at the thesis and how to structure it for this kind of writing, and then of course you'll be preparing to look at some models and also do some brainstorming since your own cause-effect paper is coming up. So, first things first, why should you be doing research, right? We didn't need to do anything like this for the previous paper, and the statement I have here, I already know everything about this story and its topics. Of course, this is a common sort of response I've gotten to this. I don't need to do any research. I'm the absolute expert. And my response is, if so, you should be choosing a different story, because I really want you to choose a story that has some sort of research component that can be enlightening for you. Even if to be honest, a lot of my favorite stories, I feel like I know them really well. And then once I start researching them, I start to get even more interested in some of the issues that are tied with them. So, a goal here could be maybe you do choose a familiar story and you find out some new things about it and the way that it's impacted society. Or you could, of course, choose a story that's a little bit less known, and then it would be more likely to be enlightening for you. So it's up to you, but I really want you to realize that the research is about discovering something new about this particular situation, whatever it might be, fiction or non, and that the research should help you to gain new appreciation for or new ways to articulate your maybe disgust or distaste with a certain story. So, story as impetus, another thing that I just like to set up before we get into structure here. I'm saying here that the story you're choosing for this paper should be an impetus for self-awareness and cultural critique, right? These are the two big things that we're juggling. Your first paper was much more about self-awareness because you were telling a personal story. Now you're not telling a personal story, you're looking at somebody else's story and thinking about how it has impacted society. You still need to have a level of self-awareness and think about how the story does tie into your own cultural mythology and your own worldview. But you need to, of course, have a bigger picture, which is more significant in this case because that's kind of where your research is going to lie, is in how this ties in to broader culture. The structure, you're going to have your introduction, same formula as before, creative context, transition, and thesis. Your body will be three-part as well, but instead of a story, now you're looking at the three effects or impacts. And then the conclusion, as always, is never going to be a summary of your points. It's always going to be a bigger picture. So let's use this first video to focus on the first two parts of the introduction. I want to look at a student model from the website this time as a guide. So if you guys will look at the course page, you'll find this paper that's called Just Checking, and I'll show you it here. So on the class site, under the prompt, we have the grading rubric, and then we have the model student essay, which I've already opened and have here. So I want to be using this. We're not going to read the whole thing now, but we'll be looking at other pieces of this paper throughout the class over the next week. And it's just exactly what I'm asking you guys to do. It's focused on a story, which in this case is an advertisement, and it's structured using MLA format, which also includes research, the new component that we're going to be focusing on for this paper. So that is the paper we're going to be looking at, and I'm going to read the introduction in a moment, but just to talk through my expectations for creative context, For this paper, the creative context needs to establish two things, and you can be as creative as you want, of course, in doing so, but you need to have a personal component and you need to set up whatever the story is that you're looking at. So, my note number one for the personal context, I say it need not be a story. So, the example we're going to look at in a moment, it is a story from the writer's or the student's life. But in order to set up a personal dynamic within your context, you don't need to tell a story. You just need to provide a little bit of context. So maybe you're telling us about how you're interested in an issue that this story deals with or something like that. We just need to get your personal investment. And I'll get back to this quote in a moment. And in the second part, story summary, as I said here, this should be brief. This is one introduction paragraph. And the summary should not be a quote. It should be your own words in a couple of sentences just telling us this is what the story is that I'm going to focus on, right? The whole point of this essay is not a book report to give us plot point by plot point, but the goal is to give us a little bit of context on the story so we can figure out what you're meaning when you're dissecting its impacts. So let's just look through this introduction very quickly and then break it down. So it says, the first time I saw the 2013 Cheerios ad just checking on TV, I immediately went online to search for the video on YouTube. I subsequently sent the link to my family group chat. Us, I wrote along with it. And just to pause here, as I mentioned, this is already a personal story, right? The author continues, the moment was monumental, and here's why. This ad stars a mixed-race family, a white mother, a black father, and their mixed daughter, and it was the first time in my entire life I could remember seeing such a dynamic in a commercial. In the 30-second piece, the young girl holds a carton of Cheerios and goes to her white mother in the kitchen to investigate. She's heard that Cheerios is good for the heart and wants to be sure this is in fact accurate. So here, right, in the 30-second piece, we're getting a summary. So we've moved on from the setup of the personal narrative into here's the actual plot. When her mother confirms the information, the girl quickly leaves. In the final shot, we see the black father asleep on the living room couch. He sits up, and Cheerios, which have been poured out across his heart, apparently by his loving daughter, scatter to the floor. It may seem simple, but it's actually quite complicated. This ad has been at the center of much study and heated controversy. And here we're getting into a little bit of a transition, right? Which we'll get to in a moment. There's a couple of certain things you should be focused on. But as far as the creative context, we're getting the two things that I've asked for, right? To go back to our lesson here. We have the personal context, which is that this ad story is actually tied to the experience of our author. And then we have a brief summary, which, as I mentioned, is just a few sentences just to give us a visual image of exactly what the story entails. Next thing here, as I already mentioned, that goes right into the transition, which I've just copied here. The transition goes from here's my personal take, here's my summary of the story, to now here's kind of a little bit of a setup for the bigger picture. So the transition here, in fact, it is no surprise when you talk about diversity in America to hear conversations about the issue of equal representation and its effects on our media and entertainment. But most of these dialogues are specifically about the capturing of homogeneous families, all black or all Asian, for example. So here in the transition, we're no longer in a personal story. We're no longer in a plot summary. Now it's saying this is a little bit of a cultural context that I'm providing, right? So those are the things that you should be focused on as you're heading into the thesis. And so our next video will be looking at things to include in your thesis.